What if I told you that a 1950s Ford truck side view mirror, a 19th century black sulfur spring, and the second largest UFO festival in America all share the exact same underlying secret?
I mean, on the surface, that sounds completely random.
Right. It sounds like a joke setup. But today we are doing a deep dive into how towns actually build and sometimes completely fake their own historical identities. Because, have you ever actually stopped to think about what is buried right underneath your feet?
Oh, yeah. Like all the time.
And I don't just mean the geological strata, right? Not just the dirt, the bedrock, the water table. I mean the incredibly dense layers of forgotten human history. You walk down a street in your hometown, a street you have walked down 1,000 times, and you probably never realize that you are stepping right over the ghost of, say, a forgotten luxury empire.
Or maybe the exact spot where a century ago someone sparked a technological revolution that changed the local world forever. It's a fascinating concept when you really pause to consider it.
Yeah, it really is.
Because we have this natural human tendency to view our current surroundings as permanent, as the finished ultimate product of history. The concrete is poured, the buildings are up, so this must be how it is.
Like we reach the end of the timeline.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the reality is that the places we live are built on these incredibly complex stack layers of human experience. And some of those layers are deeply mundane, just the slow, quiet evolution of daily agricultural or commercial life.
Right.
And some of them are, quite literally, completely out of this world.
Which is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We are going to explore how communities actually capture, process, and preserve their own identities over time. So we're going straight down the rabbit hole today.
I'm ready.
We are going to traverse the lost luxury mineral resorts of 19th century Tennessee, places that were once the absolute center of the universe for the American elite and are now practically ghosts.
Wow.
Then we are going to jump across the country to the shifting, evolving agricultural landscapes of Oregon. And ultimately, we are going to investigate what are arguably the most heavily analyzed, unidentified flying object photographs in all of human history.
The big ones.
The big ones. We're going to look at how one small town built an entire thriving culture around those very photographs.
So it's really a journey from the very grounded physical history of the Earth-like mineral springs in agriculture, right up into the skies, and into the ways we try to document the great unknown.
Right.
And what ties all of this together is the mechanism of memory.
Right.
Like, how do we remember what happened here before we arrived?
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we dive into the extraterrestrial and the unexplained, we really have to understand how history is made in the first place.
Right, the foundation.
Yeah. And to understand how history is made, we have to look at how it is preserved, or, more often than not, how it is completely lost to time. Because if physical elements like water, wood, and stone can't permanently hold a town's identity, what can?
That is a crucial starting point. I mean, we rely entirely on archives to tell us who we were, which in turn tells us who we are today. Without deliberate preservation, the default state of history is just erasure.
It just disappears.
It does. Things burn, things decay, people move on, and memory fades.
Right. And to illustrate this concept of how quickly a dominant culture can vanish, I was looking through these absolutely fascinating records from the Tennessee State Library and Archives.
Oh, nice. What did you find?
So if you go back to the 1830s, stretching all the way to the mid-1900s, East Tennessee was this massive, booming hub for what they called mineral springs resorts. I'm talking about an entire robust industry built entirely around water.
Yeah, it is a massive cultural phenomenon. And to really understand the context and the why of it all, you have to realize that in the 19th century, modern medicine as we know it was still very much in its infancy.
Right. No antibiotics, no advanced imaging.
Exactly. So people firmly believed in the curative powers of specific mineral waters. And this wasn't just like a fringe wellness trend.
Like a fad diet today?
No. This was mainstream medical advice. They would endure incredibly arduous journeys, riding for days on horseback or rattling around in profoundly uncomfortable wagons through the rugged highlands of East Tennessee.
Just to get to this water.
Just to reach these waters, hoping for concrete health benefits.
And the infrastructure that grew around this specific belief is just staggering when you look at the scale of it. The railroads actually published special train tables solely dedicated to getting tourists to these watering spas.
Wow.
Yeah. Railroad companies like the East Tennessee, Virginia, and Georgia Railroad Company were literally sponsoring and publishing their own elaborate guidebooks by 1882 just to promote business to these sites.
That is wild.
They were essentially acting as the 19th century equivalent of an online travel agency.
It became an entire self-sustaining economic ecosystem. I mean, you had stagecoach routes serving the earliest health seekers, and then as the industry boomed and the technology evolved, it transitioned into this complex network of trains and hacks, carriages, omnibuses.
Just to move people around.
Yeah, specifically designed to ferry customers the last few miles from the train depot directly to these grand establishments. The logistics alone required a massive labor force and intense coordination.
I really want to talk about the sheer scale of some of these places, because I think when we hear 19th century resort, we might picture some little wooden shacks next to a muddy puddle in the woods.
Right, a very rustic image.
Yeah. But look at Red Boiling Springs over in Macon County. I saw that name in the notes and pictured a dusty well. Was this actually a big operation?
Oh, you'd be shocked. We're talking about massive hospitality operations here. Red Boiling Springs actually peaked in popularity in the 1920s and 30s. And it didn't just have one spring. It offered a black sulfur spring and a red sulfur spring.
2 different colors.
Right. And it grew so large that it eventually featured 9 different hotels.
Wait, 9?
9. Hotels with grand names like the Palace Hotel and the Donahoe Hotel, designed to cater to thousands of visitors.
That is basically a small city dedicated entirely to bathing in sulfur.
It really was.
Or consider Bon Aqua Springs in Hickman County. The name itself literally translates to good water. It was named by a man named William Losh Weems. And by the 1870s, this place boasted accommodations for up to 500 guests at a single time.
500 people in the 1870s. That is a huge footprint.
Exactly. And if you look at an 1874 issue of the Memphis Public Ledger newspaper, you can find them advertising this incredible list of luxury offerings. They had bowling alleys, professional hairdressers, elaborate bathhouses, cuisine they proudly called unsurpassed, live music, and a lake outfitted with little boats specifically adapted for aquatic sports.
Aquatic sports in the 1870s.
I know.
Sounds like a modern-day luxury cruise ship dropped right into the middle of 19th century Tennessee.
Yeah, with bowling alleys.
Right. I mean, the sheer amount of capital required to build a bowling alley and maintain a fleet of recreational boats in that era, in that specific location, speaks volumes about the profitability of the mineral spring industry.
And then you have Tate Springs in Granger County. Now, this place was the absolute pinnacle of luxury. We're talking about world-class accommodations frequented by the titans of American industry.
The big names.
The huge names. The Fords, the Rockefellers, the Firestones, the Studebakers, the Mellons. These are the people who were literally building the modern American economy, and they were all flocking to East Tennessee.
The wealth concentrated there during the high season was immense. In 1896, the Peavine Railroad was completed, which brought in this incredibly elite clientele with unprecedented ease.
Just rolling right up.
Yeah, the absolute richest of the rich would literally arrive in their own private, opulent rail cars. And once there, they had access to amenities that rivaled anything in New York or Europe.
Like what?
They had massive stables, pristine tennis courts, a dedicated billiards room, a grand ballroom for evening galas, a 100-acre private park, and an immaculate golf course.
100-acre park. That is unbelievable. And here is the wildest part for me. They were all there for the Tate Epsom water, which was supposedly this miracle cure for stomach, kidney, and liver ailments.
The magical water.
Right. And they were actually bottling this stuff on an industrial scale and shipping it all over the world. It was a major global export originating from a single spring in Granger County.
It was basically the Silicon Valley of 19th century wellness.
That is exactly what it was.
And you also see these fascinating personal glimpses in the archives that really explain the psychology of the visitors. Take Bon Air Springs in White County, situated high up on Bon Air Mountain. In 1877, the agricultural commissioner, J.B. Killebrew, wrote that the high elevation assured vigorous health because it was far above the, and this is a quote, malarious atmosphere of the bottoms.
Malarious atmosphere of the bottoms. That sounds like something out of a gothic horror novel. What exactly were they so afraid of down in the valleys?
It's deeply rooted in the medical paradigm of the time, specifically the miasma theory of disease.
Okay, the miasma theory.
Yeah. So before the germ theory of disease was fully understood and widely adopted, people genuinely believed that illnesses were caused by bad air. Which, by the way, is literally what the word malaria translates to. Mal. Area. Bad air.
Oh, wow. I never put that together.
Yeah. So they looked at low-lying areas, swamps, and river bottoms, and they assumed that the decaying organic matter released these noxious, invisible vapors that would make you sick.
So it wasn't mosquitoes they were worried about, it was just the air itself.
Exactly. So getting up into the mountains wasn't just about enjoying a nice panoramic view. It was considered an urgent medical necessity to physically escape this toxic air.
That makes total sense of the mindset. They weren't just going on vacation. They were actively fleeing what they thought was an invisible poison.
Right. They were running for their lives, in a way.
We actually have an 1897 letter from a wealthy guest, William Trousdale Peyton, writing back to his mother. He describes enjoying the evenings in a pavilion overlooking the valley, watching these magnificent sunsets followed by a strong, pleasant breeze. And he explicitly tells her he has absolutely no idea when he will return home because it is just too incredibly pleasant up there on the mountain.
It paints this beautiful, serene picture of a very specific way of life. And you also had places like Epperson Springs, which claimed to have 5 entirely different kinds of health-giving waters, all covered by these beautiful, ornate, protective gazebos.
So elaborate.
Or Faulkner Springs, which has a fascinating origin story. It was cleverly built by a man named Clay Faulkner. He originally had a woolen mill there, powered by the spring water, which was a very standard industrial use of the natural resource back then.
Just a standard mill. But then a disastrous flood hits in 1902 and completely destroys his milling business.
Right. And instead of giving up, he just completely pivots. He remodels the surviving building, uses the very same spring water to attract health guests instead of powering looms, and just enters the resort business.
That is just brilliant.
It's a story of pure entrepreneurial survival and adaptation.
And you can't forget Whittle Springs in Knox County, right along the popular Dixie Highway. It opened in 1918 and was actually profiled by a publication called Hotel Monthly in 1919. We are talking about 200 acres, another golf course, a massive modern swimming pool that was 80 feet wide.
80 feet.
80 feet wide. And dining rooms capable of seating 400 people at once. The president of the hotel was so well connected and influential that he was sending personal handwritten letters inviting the governor of Tennessee, Austin Peay, to stay there in 1923.
So we have this thriving, massive, culturally dominant industry. It dictated where railroads were built, where the wealthiest Americans spent their summers, and how local economies functioned.
A total powerhouse.
But here's the profound preservation parallel that really anchors our discussion today. It vanished. Almost all of it, just entirely gone.
The fragility of these massive empires is truly striking. You look at the historical records, and it is just a relentless litany of slow economic decline punctuated by sudden physical destruction.
Yeah.
Like Epperson Springs, burned entirely to the ground in 1926, Bon Aqua. The Grand Hotel had to be rebuilt twice due to devastating fires, and finally it was just torn down for scrap in the 1940s.
They couldn't adapt to the shifting paradigm. Modern medicine evolved, germ theory completely replaced miasma theory, so people stopped believing that drinking sulfur water would cure liver disease.
Right, the science caught up.
Yes, and simultaneously the rise of the personal automobile and commercial airplanes completely changed how, why, and where people traveled. The whole ecosystem collapsed, and these massive resorts simply faded into the background, eventually returning to the earth.
And this is where it gets scary from a historical perspective. The only reason we even know the specific details today, like the existence of the bowling alleys, the black sulfur springs, the private rail cars, the aquatic sports, is because of physical archival materials.
Pieces of paper.
Literally just pieces of paper. We have preserved postcards. We have Commissioner Killebrew's 1874 agricultural reports. We have William Peyton's handwritten letter to his mother. If those tiny, fragile pieces of paper had burned in the resort fires or had just been thrown away during spring cleaning decades later, that entire era would be functionally erased from our collective memory.
It highlights a critical, terrifying vulnerability in how history is maintained. It doesn't just survive on its own. It requires active, deliberate, almost obsessive preservation.
Yeah, someone has to care.
Exactly. Which provides a fascinating transition to the other side of our deep dive today. If physical buildings can burn and entire industries can vanish, how do we actively save the identity of a town? Well, we have to look at McMinnville, Oregon.
Exactly, because in McMinnville right now, there is a man named Michael Hafner who is actively fighting that exact type of historical erasure on a daily basis.
And he's local, right?
Yeah, he is a third-generation resident, actually part of the very last generation born in the old McMinnville hospital, so his roots run incredibly deep. And he has taken on this monumental, almost unbelievable task. He is digitizing the massive photographic archives of the local newspaper, the News Register.
And we need to be clear about the scope here. We are not talking about scanning a small family photo album on a Sunday afternoon.
No, not at all.
The scale of this archival project is immense and physically grueling.
It is massive. There are boxes upon boxes of brittle envelopes filled with fragile film negatives dating all the way back to 1936, running uninterrupted right up until the paper finally phased out physical film in 2001.
That's decades of daily history.
Hafner has spent years using a flatbed scanner and highly specialized software to digitize over 40,000 individual images, specifically focusing on the critical period from 1936 to 1970. And there are still thousands more to go.
Over 40,000 images. What is particularly alarming about newspaper archives, and what Hafner himself points out as his motivation, is how easily they are lost to sheer negligence.
Oh, totally.
When local papers are sold to conglomerates, or when they simply move physical office locations to save on rent, decades of old film negatives are frequently just tossed straight into the dumpster.
Yeah, it breaks my heart.
It's awful. They are viewed as heavy, taking up too much space, and lacking immediate financial value. Furthermore, cellulose acetate film from that era is incredibly susceptible to degradation, vinegar syndrome, and the exact same floods and fires that destroy the Tennessee resorts.
I really like to think of a physical archive as a town's hard drive. If a newspaper throws out its negatives or a hotel burns down and takes its guest books with it, it is the exact real-world equivalent of a catastrophic hard drive failure.
That's a great analogy.
An entire generation's memory, the documentation of their daily lives, the faces of their grandparents, the buildings they worked in, it is just wiped clean, permanently unrecoverable.
But because the News Register stubbornly preserved its archive in boxes, and crucially, because Hafner is doing this painstaking, tedious work, literally cross-referencing these scanned negatives with fading captions from bound copies of original newsprint just to identify the anonymous people in them, we actually have this incredibly detailed, high-resolution window into the organic evolution of a single American community.
And when you zoom in on that evolution, using Hafner's digitized hard drive of McMinnville, you start to see the stage being intricately set for the town's most famous, world-renowned event.
The main event.
Yes, but before the aliens arrive, you just see the beautiful, mundane reality of a town growing up. You see the local parades, the high school sports games, the community banquets.
You also uncover these fascinating local titans who aggressively shape the town's trajectory. The archives prominently feature a man named Ralph Wortman, whose family founded the very first bank in McMinnville.
Ralph Wortman is such a fantastic character to find hiding in the archives. He wasn't just a stuffy banker sitting behind a desk. He was clearly this massive, enthusiastic early adopter of technology.
A real pioneer.
The photos show him as a man of many firsts for the county. He owned the county's very first motorcycle. He owned the county's first airplane. And he owned the first automobile, which was this incredible 1901 steam-powered locomobile.
A steam-powered car in 1901 is an incredible piece of machinery. It essentially operated like a miniature locomotive on wheels, requiring a boiler to generate steam pressure to drive the pistons. It was loud, it was complicated, and it was entirely revolutionary.
And the photos actually show him using the steam car in local parades, giving joyrides to dignitaries and, charmingly, to the local kids.
That specific detail about his obsession with cutting-edge technology is vital context for the culture of the town. Ralph and his brother Frank also left a huge philanthropic legacy. They funded Wortman Park, Wortman Stadium, and a large public swimming pool complex in 1956.
They were really investing in the community.
They were building the modern infrastructure of the town. But beyond the individuals, the photographic archive captures the shifting physical and economic landscape of the region in a way words rarely can.
It's exactly like watching a time-lapse video of the 20th century. You see the old 1888 county courthouse, which was this major, proud architectural landmark, slowly falling apart by the 1950s.
Yeah, the wear and tear.
You see historic architecture being subjected to these aggressive mid-century modernization trends, like the Union Block building, which the photos show getting this bizarre facelift in the 50s and 60s that added what architects called eyebrows. Yeah, these protruding overhangs that basically obliterated its original historic features in the name of looking modern.
You also trace the stark migration of commerce. The photos show 3rd Street, which had been the long-held commercial center of the town for decades, beginning to suffer visible vacancies as the city grew and businesses gravitated toward the more spacious outskirts. We see the arrival of the Mayfair Plaza, which was McMinnville's very first modern automobile-centric shopping center.
And the archives show how exuberantly they celebrated that modernization. At Christmas time at the Mayfair Plaza, Santa Claus didn't arrive on a boring old sleigh pulled by horses. He would literally fly in on an Evergreen helicopter, climb down a fire department ladder truck to the parking lot, and greet the kids.
That is so deeply 1950s.
It is this wonderful, deeply mid-century blend of traditional holiday folklore and cutting-edge aviation technology.
But perhaps the most thematically profound shift captured in these archives, sometimes found literally just in the background of a mundane car crash photo that Hafner happened to scan, is the evolution of local industry.
Yes, the great shift from turkeys to wine.
Exactly. The archives prominently show the 1940s-era Swift poultry turkey plant.
Just a huge turkey processing facility.
Right. For decades, processing poultry was a massive staple of the local economy. It defined the agricultural output. But the photos meticulously document how that exact same industrial plant was completely transformed in 1970 into McMinnville's very first winery, the Erie Vineyards.
From a poultry processing plant covered in feathers to the sophisticated birthplace of the local wine industry, that is just an incredible visual representation of an economic pivot.
It perfectly encapsulates Oregon's broader agricultural and economic evolution. They realized the soil and climate in the Willamette Valley were perfectly suited for Pinot Noir grapes, and the entire identity of the region shifted.
So they just adapted?
Yes. You are looking at a town sitting right on the precipice of a brand new, modern identity. They are leaving behind the older, purely agrarian roots and boldly stepping into a more specialized modern era defined by aviation, retail plazas, and viticulture.
So Hafner's digitized archives give us this rich, highly textured background of McMinnville. We see the parades, we see the tech-loving banker in his steam car, we see the turkey plant becoming a vineyard. It proves the town is highly adaptable.
Definitely.
But while all of that structural evolution was happening, right at the dawn of the 1950s, another local resident took 2 photographs. And those 2 photographs didn't just capture local history, they completely captured the attention of the entire planet.
We are, of course, talking about the events of May 11th, 1950.
Yes. Let me set the scene for you, because it plays out exactly like a tense mid-century sci-fi movie. We were at the rural farm of Evelyn and Paul Trent. Now, technically, to be perfectly accurate to the geography for the purists out there, their farm was actually located about 13 miles southwest of McMinnville, much closer to a smaller town called Sheridan.
Right, but McMinnville was the nearest large cultural and media hub, so the name attached itself to the event and stuck forever.
Exactly. So it's 7:30 in the evening. The lighting is getting toward that specific long-shadowed late spring dusk.
The golden hour.
Yes. Evelyn Trent is out in the backyard doing chores. And I have to point out this hilarious little historical discrepancy in the source materials that always fascinated me. If you read the interview they gave to the local radio station KMCM, Evelyn explicitly says she was out back feeding the caged rabbits.
Okay, the rabbits.
But if you read the interview they gave just 2 days earlier to the local newspaper, the Telephone Register, she clearly says she was out back feeding the chickens.
It's a classic textbook example of how eyewitness testimony and human memory can fluctuate wildly on the minor peripheral details, even just days after a highly traumatic or surprising event.
It's so funny, though. Chickens are rabbits.
I know. The brain hyper-focuses on the anomaly, the shock, and fails to securely encode the mundane background details. Whether she was holding poultry feed or rabbit food is ultimately irrelevant because the core of the narrative remains fiercely consistent.
Right. The livestock diet is irrelevant to what happens next because Evelyn looks up into the evening sky and she sees it. A slow-moving, intensely metallic, disc-shaped object just silently approaching from the northeast.
She immediately yells for her husband, Paul, who is inside the house. He runs out, looks up, sees the exact same massive metallic object hovering in the sky, and instantly realizes he needs a camera.
So he sprints back inside in a panic. In one version of the story, he frantically thinks the camera's in the car, but Evelyn correctly remembers it is in the house. He grabs their folding Kodak camera. Crucially, the camera is already loaded with film.
Thank goodness.
He runs back out to the yard, trying to get a lock on the object, and manages to snap 2 pictures over the course of about 30 tense seconds.
30 seconds goes by fast in that situation.
Super fast. He takes the first shot, quickly advances the film manually, which you had to do with those old Kodaks, moves slightly to his right as the object starts gaining altitude and speed, and snaps a second picture just before the disc speeds away toward the west. They both later described it as leaving with a silent wind.
The silent wind. That's a great description.
Paul's father also claimed he caught a brief, shocking glimpse of it before it vanished over the horizon.
Now, in today's digital age, if someone photographed a clear, metallic UFO hovering over their house, it would be uploaded to global social media platforms within 60 seconds.
Oh, absolutely.
It would be trending worldwide before the object even left the airspace. But the timeline of the Trent photographs in 1950 is a fascinating psychological study in mid-century pacing, pragmatism, and sheer thriftiness.
This is hands down one of my favorite details in this entire saga. Paul Trent didn't immediately run to the press. He didn't call the local military base. He didn't even develop the film that night.
No, film was expensive, and driving into town to get it developed was a process. The roll in the folding Kodak camera wasn't completely used up.
It still had frames left.
Right. So being a highly practical Depression-era farmer, Paul simply put the camera away in a drawer. He absolutely refused to waste the unexposed frames remaining on the roll just for 2 pictures of a flying disc.
I can't get over that.
He waited several days, until Mother's Day, to finish shooting the rest of the roll on standard family portraits before finally taking the film into town to get it developed.
That detail always completely floors me. You think you just saw an extraterrestrial craft, or at least the most advanced aircraft in human history, but you are not going to waste 3 frames of Kodak film to prove it. You're going to patiently wait for Mother's Day to take pictures of the family first.
It speaks volumes to a certain stoic mindset. In a much later interview in 1997, the Trents actually mentioned that they initially assumed the object was some sort of highly classified, secret military aircraft. The Cold War was ramping up, and paranoia was high.
So they were scared.
Yes. They were actually deeply worried that publicizing the photos might bring them unwanted, dangerous trouble from the federal government.
But the photos do eventually get developed. And this is where we get this amazing, profound, full-circle moment with the local history we just talked about. When Paul finally has the physical prints in his hand, who does he show them to?
Well, he brings them into town and shows them to his trusted banker.
And his banker is a man named Frank Wortman.
Frank Wortman, who was the direct brother of Ralph Wortman, the man with the 1901 steam-powered locomobile and the first airplane we discussed earlier.
Exactly. The prominent local family of early tech adopters is sitting right there at the center of this narrative. Frank Wortman is so intensely intrigued by these 2 crisp pictures of a flying disc that he actually takes them and displays them prominently right there in the front window of the bank in downtown McMinnville for everyone walking by to see.
And that physical bank window display is how the viral spread of 1950 begins.
The analog viral spread.
Exactly. The photos catch the eye of a local reporter named Bill Powell from the telephone register. Powell realizes the potential magnitude, borrows the actual physical negatives from Paul Trent, examines them closely for splices or manipulation, and can find absolutely no obvious evidence of tampering or double exposure.
So on June 8th, which is nearly a full month after the actual sighting, Powell runs the story on the absolute front page of the telephone register. The massive headline reads, "At long last, authentic photographs of flying saucer," with a very deliberate question mark at the end.
From there, the regional story explodes into a global sensation. The International News Service, the INS, picks up the story off the wire and broadcasts it to newspapers all across the country. And then it hits the absolute pinnacle of mid-century media exposure, Life magazine.
On June 26, 1950, Life magazine publishes large, cropped versions of the Trent's photos, alongside a picture of Paul looking honest while holding his Kodak camera, broadcasting the small Oregon farm to the entire world. And here's where it gets really interesting. Because, of course, Life magazine needed the original source material to print those high-quality images.
Right. And the Trents had reluctantly loaned out their precious original negatives with the strict written promise that they would be safely returned to the farm.
But Life magazine somehow inexplicably, quote-unquote, misplaced them.
Oh, man.
They told the Trents the original negatives were simply lost in the shuffle of a massive publication, and those original negatives stayed completely lost for nearly 2 decades.
Which brings us to the intense, deeply controversial, decades-long scientific and forensic battlefield that erupted over these 2 photographs. Because for over 60 years, these images have been subjected to every conceivable type of scientific analysis and optical scrutiny known to man.
Let's fast forward to 1967. The negatives are finally found. They had been sitting forgotten in the dusty files of United Press International, which had merged with the INS years earlier. The UPI loans these newly discovered original negatives to a man named Dr. William K. Hartman.
Dr. Hartman was a highly respected astronomer working as a lead investigator for the Condon Committee.
Tell us about the Condon Committee, because that's a big deal, right?
It is important context. The Condon Committee was a major government-funded UFO research project directed by physicist Edward Condon out of the University of Colorado Boulder. Their explicit mandate was to apply rigorous, objective scientific scrutiny to UFO phenomena, largely to determine if they represented a threat to national security.
Okay, so serious government funding. And Hartman finally gets his hands on the original Trent negatives. He goes out to Oregon, extensively interviews Paul and Evelyn, and is deeply impressed by how remarkably sincere they are.
They weren't seeking attention.
Right. He notes in his files that they have never asked for a dime, never tried to cash in on the fame, and never wavered on the core facts.
Okay.
But more importantly, he applies actual hard science to the photos. And his initial conclusion was completely shocking to the scientific establishment. He thought the photos might actually be genuine.
Hartman utilized what is known in optical physics as photometric analysis. When you look at an object through a significant amount of atmosphere, the light physically scatters. This phenomenon is called Rayleigh scattering.
Rayleigh scattering?
Yes. It's the exact same optical effect that causes distant mountain ranges to look washed out, lighter, and distinctly blue compared to trees or rocks that are right in front of you. The atmosphere itself is acting as a filter.
Wait, I have to stop you there. How can you possibly measure the atmosphere in a black and white photo of a farm? There's no color, you can't see the mountain turning blue. Isn't that just a massive guess?
It's a great question, and it gets to the heart of photometric science.
Yeah.
Even without color data, Rayleigh scattering drastically affects luminance and contrast.
Okay.
The further away an object is, the more intervening air and dust particles scatter the ambient light into the path of the camera lens, which effectively lowers the contrast and raises the apparent brightness of the dark areas of the object. So Hartman isn't looking for blue. He's looking at the specific degradation of contrast.
Ah, I see.
He looks at the brightness of the deeply shadowed underside of the UFO in the photos, and he compares it to the underside of an oil tank that is clearly visible in the foreground of the picture, sitting right next to the Trent's garage.
Okay, so he has a control object in the foreground to measure against.
Precisely. And using a densitometer to measure the exact opacity of the negative, he notes that the underside of the UFO appears significantly, measurably lighter than the underside of the nearby oil tank. He attributed this specific difference directly to that atmospheric extinction or scattering we just talked about.
Wow.
From a purely photometric standpoint, this suggested to Hartman that the object was not a small model dangling close to the camera, but rather a massive physical object located at a considerable distance away.
He actually wrote in his official report that it was one of the very few UFO cases on record where the geometric, psychological, and physical factors all appeared entirely consistent with the bold assertion that an extraordinary artificial metallic flying object flew within sight of two witnesses.
It is crucially worth noting, however, that even in that initial, incredibly positive report, Hartman maintained his scientific caution. He explicitly noted that the object appeared directly beneath a pair of overhead power lines in both photographs.
He saw the wires.
He did. He stated clearly that his photometric tests could not definitively, 100%, rule out the possibility that the object was a small model suspended from one of those wires by an unresolved thread that was simply too thin for the film to capture.
But the believers finally had their respected scientific champion. And in the 1970s, another prominent ufologist, Bruce Maccabee, threw his considerable weight behind the photos, too. Maccabee used advanced densitometric measurements, analyzing the specific density of the silver halide crystals on the negative.
Really digging into the film itself.
Yeah. He heavily backed up Hartman's initial assessment, claiming the lighting unequivocally proved it was a large physical object at a distance, and he stated firmly that he could find zero optical evidence of a string or thread anywhere in the negatives.
But science requires intense debate, and the skeptics were about to strike back incredibly hard in the 1980s. Enter Philip J. Klass and Robert Schieffer, both prominent journalists and highly notable aggressive UFO skeptics who made it their mission to debunk these cases.
These guys took one look at the photos and called it a complete, undeniable hoax. And their primary argument wasn't about the complex math of atmospheric extinction or densitometry. It was about something much simpler: telling time.
Klass and Schieffer bypassed the atmosphere entirely and focused their attention on the shadows cast by the physical structures in the photographs, specifically the roof of the garage visible on the left-hand side.
Paul and Evelyn Trent had always claimed, consistently for decades, that the sighting happened around 7:30 p.m. as the sun was getting low in the evening.
But Klass and Schieffer analyzed the specific angle and direction of the shadows on the garage based on the date of May 11th in Oregon, and they concluded that the shadows definitively indicated morning light. They argued the photos were taken around 10:00 a.m., not 7:30 p.m.
To a trained skeptic, this is the ultimate smoking gun. If the witnesses lied about the fundamental, verifiable timeline of the event, claiming it was evening when the physical photographic evidence strongly points to morning, then their entire testimony becomes profoundly suspect.
Klass also claimed to find several other minor contradictions in their story over the years, further undermining their credibility.
And Klass and Schieffer didn't just attack the timeline. They offered a highly specific, easily verifiable, alternative explanation for what the object actually was. They argued forcefully that it was a small model hanging from those visible power lines, and they even identified the exact model.
This part is wild.
They said it looked exactly, and I mean exactly, like a detached side view mirror from a vehicle. Specifically, they pointed out its uncanny, almost perfect resemblance to the round wing mirrors used on Ford F-100 trucks of that era.
The physical resemblance is undeniably strong when you look at the side-by-side comparisons. If you look at the offset mounting bracket on those classic Ford mirrors, it perfectly matches a small protrusion or antenna detail visible on the very top of the object in the photographs.
It looks identical.
When Schieffer sent all of this exhaustive research, the shadow analysis, the truck mirror theory, back to William Hartman, Hartman was so convinced by the shadow discrepancies that he actually withdrew his initial positive assessment that he had provided to the Condon Committee years earlier.
This raises an incredibly important question about the human brain. How much does confirmation bias play into all of this? You have trained, highly educated ufologists looking at the exact same physical negative and seeing undeniable mathematical proof of atmospheric extinction on a massive alien craft.
Right.
And you have trained, highly educated skeptics looking at the exact same negative and seeing a Ford F-100 truck mirror dangling on a piece of fishing line in the morning sun.
It's the ultimate Rorschach test for the scientific community. Both sides apply rigorous, peer-reviewed methodology, but their initial, foundational assumptions heavily influence how they interpret the raw data. The ufologist inherently assumes the witnesses are telling the truth, until proven otherwise, so the lighting anomalies confirm distance. The skeptic inherently assumes the phenomenon is impossible until proven otherwise, so the shadows confirm a deliberate lie.
Which brings us to the modern era, where 21st century technology finally gets a crack at these mid-20th century negatives. We are talking about the 2013 IPACO study. If we thought the Condon Committee was thorough, this is on a whole different level.
IPACO is a highly specialized group of French researchers, Antoine Cousin, François Louange, and Jeff Quick. In April of 2013, they published an incredibly deep, exhaustive photogrammetry and radiometric study of the McMinnville pictures that aimed to settle the debate once and for all.
This wasn't just looking at shadows or guessing at the time of day. This was deep, unforgiving geometric analysis. They focused heavily on those power lines that are clearly visible stretching across the sky right above the UFO.
They established a rigorous, mathematically sound geometric framework. They defined a point A on the upper wire, point B on the lower wire, and point O as the exact center of the UFO. They then carefully measured the ratio of the distance from the UFO to the upper wire, which they mathematically designated as the OAOB ratio.
And here is the jaw-dropping statistic they found. Between the first photograph and the second photograph, that OAOB ratio only varied by 0.4%.
That is incredibly small.
Basically, the relative position of the UFO beneath the wires was near constant across two entirely different photographs taken from two different positions in the yard.
And we really need to understand why that matters. The geometric deduction from that specific finding is completely devastating to the idea of a distant craft flying freely in the sky.
How so?
If you've ever tried to take a picture of the moon on your phone while walking and realized how much the perspective shifts relative to the trees in your yard, you know how tricky judging distance in photos can be. For that specific ratio to remain nearly constant across two photographs taken from slightly different positions, one of two things must be true.
Okay.
Either the object was flying completely freely, but happened to move perfectly, precisely, along a specific, mathematically improbable sighting line directly away from the camera's lens.
Which would be a crazy 1 in a billion coincidence.
Or, far more likely, according to the basic laws of geometry, the object was physically tethered to the wire itself on a two-dimensional plane relative to the camera.
They didn't stop there. They ran the numbers based on the known geometry of the Trent's house and the exact height of the utility wires. They calculated definitively that the camera to UFO distance was definitely less than 200 feet.
Wow.
This meant the object could not possibly be more than 6 feet in diameter and was likely much, much smaller.
They even calculated the object's specific movement between the two frames. They determined it had a swaying movement of about 9 degrees and a tipping motion, tilting back about 25 degrees between the two shots.
That sounds like it's swinging.
This is exactly the kind of chaotic motion you would expect from a light, hollow object swinging on a thread in a gentle evening breeze, rather than a massive, propelled craft.
And then comes the absolute smoking gun of the entire 60-year debate. In June 2013, they added a complementary study. They used a brand new software tool they developed called a vertical thread detection tool, which utilized what they call spatial high-pass filtering.
High-pass filtering is a highly advanced technique used in digital image processing. It is designed to enhance high-frequency information like incredibly sharp edges or tiny, hard-to-see details, while aggressively suppressing low-frequency information, like the smooth, uniform gradient of a cloudy sky.
I think of a high-pass filter like putting on a pair of really good polarized sunglasses to look down into a muddy river. It strips away all the uniform, blinding glare of the water on top so you can suddenly see the sharp, distinct edges of the rocks. Or, in this specific case, a tiny piece of fishing line hidden right beneath the surface.
That's a perfect analogy. So they mathematically isolate the specific space directly between the top of the UFO and the power wire above it. They sum up the pixel values, run this advanced high-pass filter, and boom, the software finds a clear, mathematically undeniable signal in the noise.
It found the string.
They found clear, documented evidence of suspension thread right above the object, physically connecting it to the wire. Their final, bolded conclusion in the study was absolute. The clear result of this study was that the McMinnville UFO was a model hanging from a thread.
Okay, I have to pause and play devil's advocate here, because despite all the brilliant French math and the high-pass filters, there is still one massive piece of the puzzle that the math absolutely does not explain. If this was just a Ford truck mirror dangling on a piece of fishing line, why on earth did the Trents do it?
The motive remains the biggest, most glaring mystery for the skeptics, and it's the one thing that keeps the debate alive.
Right. If it's a deliberate hoax, why did they never try to make a dime off it? They were simple, pragmatic farmers. They took the pictures, patiently waited till Mother's Day to develop them, and never asked for a single cent from the local newspaper or the INS or Life magazine.
Not a penny.
They didn't write a sensational book, they didn't charge admission to their farm, and they stubbornly, fiercely stuck to their story, never breaking character once until Evelyn died in 1997 and Paul died in 1998. If this is a hoax, it has to be the most unprofitable, staggeringly held, brilliantly executed hoax in the history of the world.
The psychological profile of a hoaxer usually involves a very clear desire for fame, significant financial gain, or at least a private, ego-driven thrill of fooling the experts, which almost always culminates in a dramatic deathbed confession. The Trents exhibited absolutely none of that expected behavior. They just wanted to be left alone to farm.
Which leaves us in this incredible, frustrating gray area. You have the French software definitively finding the thread, and you have these two humble farmers who took their wild story to the grave without ever cashing in.
Yeah, it's a standoff.
But here's the thing. Regardless of whether that metallic object was a genuine scout ship from Zeta Reticuli or just a detached side view mirror from a 1950 Ford F-100, the cultural impact of those two photographs on the town of McMinnville is 100% real, tangible, and undeniable.
And that brings us to McMinnville today. The town did not shy away from this controversial, weird legacy. They leaned into it with incredible, enthusiastic force.
They leaned in hard. Every single spring, downtown McMinnville is happily invaded by ETs, Darth Vaders, and people wearing literal tinfoil hats. They host the massive annual UFO Festival.
I love that.
And this is not some small, poorly attended local gathering in a high school gym. It is the second largest UFO festival in the entire United States, trailing only behind Roswell, New Mexico.
The scale of the festival highlights exactly how communities can build deep, lasting tradition around the unexplainable. It becomes part of their DNA. Katie Chisholm, the event organizer at McMinnville's Hotel Oregon, which serves as the bustling ground zero for the festival, noted that many younger locals don't even know the deep, contentious history of the Trent photos or the Condon Committee.
They just know the festival.
Right, they embrace the celebration regardless because it's their town's identity.
The events they put on are just fantastic. They have the Alien Abduction Dash 5K run where people run in costumes. They have a massive pet costume parade where golden retrievers are dressed as little green men. They host local wine tastings with brilliant punny names like Close Encounters of the Third Vine.
But it is not just revelry in costumes. Inside the historic Hotel Oregon, the mood shifts significantly. They host incredibly serious panel discussions, premiere documentary screenings, and invite prominent speakers who dive deep into the research, continuing the very real, very heated debate that Hartman, Maccabee, Class, and the APECO team started decades ago.
It's a real academic conference mixed in.
It is a unique cultural space where the unexplainable is both joyously celebrated and rigorously interrogated at the same time.
And it is so fitting that this massive celebration of the skies happens in McMinnville, because the UFO legacy ties perfectly into the town's completely legitimate, highly verified history of aviation. Remember Ralph Wortman and his absolute obsession with being the first guy with an airplane?
Oh, yeah.
McMinnville is now home to the world-renowned Evergreen Aviation and Space Museum.
The museum is a phenomenal world-class aerospace facility. Founded originally by Delford M. Smith and Michael King Smith, it houses more than 150 significant military and civilian aircraft, modern drones, and historical spacecraft spread across multiple massive pavilions.
You can walk in there right now and see an actual Titan II SLV launch room. You can see hardware that went into orbit. And most famously, it is the final resting place of the legendary Hughes H-4 Hercules, which is much better known to the world as the Spruce Goose. The sheer scale of aviation history preserved in that town is breathtaking.
So if we connect all of this back to the bigger picture and directly compare McMinnville to those lost ghost town Tennessee resorts we discussed at the very beginning.
Yeah, let's tie it all together.
The mineral springs of Red Boiling Springs and Bon Aqua faded away entirely because their entire identity was tied to a single, fragile, fleeting paradigm, the 19th century medical belief in curative waters. When the world changed and germ theory took over, they simply could not adapt. Their hard drive was wiped clean, leaving only paper archives.
But McMinnville survived and thrived because it perfectly, organically layered its identities over time. It didn't stubbornly erase its past, it actively built on it. It evolved from a pure agricultural hub, literally transitioning a turkey processing plant into the region's first premium winery, to a preserver of deep aviation and technological history with the Spruce Goose.
And then to the quirky, vibrant, globally recognized capital of the paranormal with the UFO Festival.
It is a town that knows exactly how to preserve its history, whether it's through Michael Hafner painstakingly scanning 40,000 negatives or the community hosting a 5K run for aliens.
It is the absolute epitome of a resilient, adaptable community identity. They took the mundane and the extraordinary, the turkeys and the flying saucers, and wove them into something permanent.
So what does this all mean for us?
It leaves us with a genuinely fascinating paradox to deeply consider. If Paul and Evelyn Trent did indeed fake those photographs on that mild May evening in 1950, if they just hung a broken truck mirror from a utility wire with some fishing line and lied to the world about the time of day, they didn't just execute a simple temporary prank.
No, they didn't.
They accidentally created a piece of enduring, monumental conceptual art. They unintentionally authored the modern cultural identity of an entire city, sparking a tradition that outlived them both.
That is wild to think about.
It makes you wonder, as you walk down the street in your own hometown tomorrow, looking at the bronze statues, attending the annual summer festivals, and repeating the local legends to your kids, how many of those historical traditions are based on absolute, verified, undisputed facts?
Right.
And how many are just brilliant collective fictions that we have all silently agreed to keep alive simply because they make our community infinitely more interesting?
That is a thought that will absolutely keep you up at night. Next time you see a weird shadow in a historical photo or a strange silent light moving in the evening sky, just remember, you might not just be looking at a truck mirror, you might be looking at the start of a 100-year-old tradition. Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us. Keep your eyes on the skies, question the archives, and we will catch you next time.